More to Marketing. Welcome to More to Marketing, the podcast that explores marketing, product, and everything business. I'm your host, Susan, and today we're going to be talking about how to navigate the complexities and create an award-winning brand that actually can stand the test of time. I have a very special guest today, Zoë. Now, Zoë has over 20 plus years of career experience navigating the always changing world of marketing. Zoë has actually traveled around the world and has done this across 3 continents, so she knows what she's talking about over the last 2 decades. And she's been crafting strategies not just for startups, but for some of the biggest global giants that you've heard of, such as Nike, Adidas, Microsoft, and Walmart, to name a few. And while Zoë wears many professional hats, as all marketers generally do, at the core, she loves to be a storyteller. She's dedicated to building brand narratives that really resonate, and brand is at her heart. Welcome, Zoë.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. That's quite the intro.
Well, I would love to hear more about you and also a bit about your career path too, please, if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I've had the luxury of doing this across many continents. So despite the lovely accent, I actually started my career in Europe. So I'm originally from Switzerland and I was raised in Spain, daughter to a German mother and an English father. So quite the mutt with an American accent living in Australia. So I always start with that because it's quite confusing, but it's given me the opportunity to be able to understand diverse cultures and build that into some of the stories that we tell. So I started out in traditional advertising too many years ago when it was very much a la Mad Men, Don Draper style on Madison Avenue. So I worked with some of the greats. So worked at Grey Advertising, Saatchi, worked with Publicis, and then transitioned into smaller brand building companies that focused on tech predominantly and also retail. So was very lucky to work with some amazing brands such as Intel and, as you mentioned, Nike and Adidas. And Intel really followed me from 3 different companies. So I always consider myself a little bit of a tech geek at heart. But as you yourself mentioned, I went to film school, so storytelling has always been in my blood. And I find that telling those authentic stories really is at the foundation of building a strong, relevant brand. So, and then, moved out to Australia 10 years ago and moved over to client side, where I was able to build brands from the inside out. And I always compare it to being able to raise the child versus just babysitting the child, where if you're on the agency side, you have to hand it back. Whereas working within a brand, you get to really go through the good, bad, and the ugly, but you have the insights that you might not necessarily have from the outside. So
100% agree. It's one of those fun things where in consultancy land, you might be able to work on many, many clients, but then you don't have the control. So you can't always direct that narrative or that story you're hoping that they will tell. But now that you are the client, you can do that and you can see it actually go to full fruition as well.
Absolutely. It's been a real joy. So the last 4 years working with Rebel Sport and most recently working at Alternaleaf, which is a very interesting space to be in here in Australia and a very young company, which has grown to be now one of the leaders in alternative healthcare in Australia.
There's definitely a whole pile of new types of products and services coming out that haven't got a brand that's established. And as we all know, there are many aspects to brands themselves. What have you found to be the most complex part when you've been trying to build a brand? And can you tell us a little bit about the why behind that too?
Yeah, and look, it depends on the various industry and the brand itself, to be honest with you. There's when it's a young brand, it's very much figuring out who you are and what you want to stand for. And then making sure that those values come through in the narratives that when you're speaking to your customers or potential customers. The challenge is really because you are not heard of is how do you build that foundation and get people to understand what you do. That's probably the biggest challenge that we have at Alternaleaf is we're regulated by a number of governing bodies, and it's quite hard for us to let people know what it is that we do without going into the detail, given the advertising regulations and limitations. So in this case, in this particular brand, where we're currently in, is we have to be quite, I want to say, careful and also quite creative in how we form those brand narratives to let people understand that we are here to help them. Who it is that we are and what it is that we do. It's hard to even talk about us as a service, given that we're in the telehealth, digital health industry, and then the types of treatments and products that are in the alternative medicine space. So there's multiple facets to building a brand in this particular industry, but one thing always stays the same, and that is just being true to your core. I think that's the one element that does not change no matter what brand you're building, is making sure that you're true to your purpose. Why do you exist? What is your purpose here? And then making sure that you live those values through the narratives that you have with your customers. Don't try and be something you're not. Make sure that you are actually building that trust and authenticity, because then it will come. Quite frankly, it's like, don't try to push the boulder uphill. It's much easier to rely on what it is that you do best and just be very transparent in what it is that you do.
I think one of the biggest mistakes I see happening out there is just assuming your competitor is doing well and almost copycat style, whether it might be even down to colors or through to similar messaging, and not having that unique distinctness for your brand that you can stand behind yourself.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that quite a bit because we are the leader in the industry here. We actually have a lot of copycats that follow us. But to be quite honest, we're still figuring out how we best communicate what we do. So we see others copying us and potentially following us in a direction that's not necessarily the right one.
Exactly.
Yeah, but you have to be original. You have to differentiate. I mean, that is the only way that you are going to ever compete. Currently, the category that we sit in has dozens and dozens of competitors, albeit smaller, but they're all saying the same thing, and a lot of them copying what we started to say. And so it is being agile and understanding your customers. In our case, it's patients. So we try to learn from our patients, and we're still a fairly young company, but we have such rich data now. We have over 150,000 patients that come to us, so we can learn from them. What are their needs? How do we best serve them? Where are the tension points, and then how do we overcome those? So I think that's really the key, and that's individual to each brand. So you can't just copy another brand, because ultimately the way you serve your customer is going to be different for each individual brand.
Exactly. And that probably leads into another question I have about how important it is building a brand within a company before expanding beyond just brand. So you've been working on this new startup within the digital health space. What steps have you gone through to build it first and then look a bit beyond?
Well, we're definitely still in that building phase, because it is such a young company. But there's key things that I've been working on since I've started, and that is really establishing our customer segments and our personas. So as I mentioned, we have 150,000 patients. We are doing market research to understand the actual category here in Australia, and identify where those gaps are, so that we can really understand, who are the people that we can best serve? How do we speak to them? Where are they? So these are all foundations, again, within the country that you're in, making sure that you nail that first. But ultimately, personas will change country to country, but then also building out the other foundations like a customer value proposition. So once you know who your customer is and what they need, making sure that everyone within the company is aligned to that proposition. And so it's not just marketing, it's, your customer service team, it's your tech team. Everyone is moving towards that same North Star, which ultimately is going to help your customers.
And I don't think it can be overstated enough that have everyone in the company live and breathe these values and the brand and to understand it, because ideas can come from anyone internally as well. And if they really live and breathe the brand, they're going to be feeling and resonating that when they're talking to potential partners or clients or customers. So I think a lot of companies forget that even when they're onboarding contractors, for example.
You can't see me, but I'm nodding vigorously. Yes, it is so important. And that's one of the things that, we've scaled up incredibly quickly. So, and we've doubled the size. We have 800 people that now currently work for the broader organization, and rallying all of those, team members to be living and breathing what it is that we stand for. And ultimately we are patient first. And that is the bedrock of why multiple brands were built in the first place. And so making sure that everything always ladders up to positive patient outcomes and a positive patient experience, that's at the core of what we do and why we do it every day. So we'll even start some of our meetings by going through our NPS or going through surveys, and just pulling out what's the most recent thing one of our patients said, both good and bad, so that we always bring it back to them.
Exactly. And that's part of your key performance indicators there too. So always staying relevant. So everyone's going down the same path when it comes to the score you're looking for or the improvements you need to do. So that process is in place that everyone can be involved in. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's NPS, but then it's also social listening, and going broader. We spend maybe too much time on Reddit, as communities have started building, but it provides a wealth of knowledge to pain points that patients might be having, and understand the various communities and how we can support those. Because again, community is such an important aspect to every brand, but in particular in healthcare, making sure that you are understanding the broader community needs. And health is such a personal, important aspect of everyone's lives. It's very different to selling a pair of shoes or a football when
Yep.
I was working at Rebel. So yeah, it's an interesting space.
And I suppose because you are so new and evolving and you've now got data, so you can do some analysis there as well as your surveys, your NPS, all of these magical things that you can help with decisions and how to position your brand better. How do you ensure your brand stays relevant in this changing environment all the time? Because we know that technology has made an impact, which is why telehealth is now available, for example. So how do you keep the brand relevant there?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one of the things that has really struck me, at least in my time here, is that the industry evolves, the category evolves, but a patient's needs really stays quite consistent. Um, it's a patient needs access to healthcare. They want to have a positive and nurturing experience when they're not feeling well. Um, and what we've been able to do is allow them access to that from the comfort of their own home. So you can imagine, if you're in pain or if you're have anxiety or lacking sleep, the last thing you want to do is get in a car and drive to a clinic and
Yep.
sit in the crowded waiting room. Um, and so telehealth and digital health in general allows that access. So there's certain fundamentals of patients' needs, such as access and a positive experience, that doesn't really change. How that is delivered can always be optimized, and that's why we've got such a massive team of amazing doctors. We've got over 150 doctors, clinicians, both doctors and nurses, as well as an entire engineering team that's building bespoke products to help create this access and make the experience seamless and frictionless. you're not feeling well, the last thing you want is, to have to your credit card not to go through, or something on the payment portal not to work. It's
Yep.
every little thing has to be frictionless, and that's where we spend our time, in really, evolving the brand and being relevant. It's not just saying what we do, but it's really walking the walk. Everyone
Mm.
can kind of talk the talk, but we try to walk the walk.
I think that the biggest piece out of this particular question for me is the brand stays the same. It's the product that's evolved, but the brand doesn't necessarily have to evolve with it, because you're still doing what you say you're going to do as part of your values, your ethos of what your product or service is. It's just changing how it's being delivered or optimizing it so that it's a better experience. But the brand still remains the same and still has that trust that goes with it.
100%.
Mm.
You said it better than I could.
How do you actually measure, though, the effect of branding efforts? A lot of people out there are focused on, for example, the NPS or the sales numbers. But what do you think is a better way to actually measure success of a brand?
I don't know if I'd use the word better. I'll get into trouble if I say that. But
Or an
I think there's
alternative way. We'll
I
call it
think there's
alternative measure.
yeah. No, and it's such a good question. And I actually just came back from a CMO conference where I posed a very similar question to, my fellow colleagues, because there is always this ongoing debate around short-term results and long-term effectiveness, right? And
Yep.
immediate ROI versus long-term brand building. And me being, a brand advocate and evangelist, obviously has me leaning a little bit more into the long-term. So there's lots of different ways that you can measure it. There's a brand health tracker is the most obvious, and that was one of the first things that we implemented, or I implemented here when I came on board, was making sure we understand, what is our awareness? How many people within Australia know who we are? And then, how many of them would consider us, those that know of us, who would consider us? And then you have the continuous questions that go down the conversion funnel of, intent and purchase. But ultimately, being able to, when you're still a young brand, measure brand awareness and consideration, those are metrics that will hopefully yield to long-term results. Because obviously, the more awareness you have, the more people you have looking at your brand, the more people you would have considering you. And then if you're doing the right thing, they'll convert and they'll become future patients. So that's the easy one. That there's great products out there that you can have an always on health tracker now, as well as great companies and services that offer that on a quarterly basis. The other thing that we're currently looking at doing is measuring brand equity. And that one's a harder one to just basically sum up in a sentence, because every brand will measure brand equity differently. And it's a combination of brand consideration, awareness, traffic, sentiment, perception. So there's all these different areas that you can measure. Brand sentiment is another one that you can measure with social listening tools. As I mentioned, Reddit before, that's another great way, is to just listen what's out there in the universe. And then you overlay all of that data to get to that brand equity measure. And again, it's not simple. It's one that we're still building out here at Alternaleaf. We are we're bringing in brand strategists. We have a great data team. I've built out a full team of brand specialists that can monitor all of these channels and bring these insights together, so that we then have more informed, longer term strategies, and consistent strategies, which is the other key to long term success.
100%. And that consistency piece is very important, because it's easy to lose sight and just jump on the latest fad or trend that might be coming along, depending on what your product or service is in. Many times you'll see that there's something that goes viral, say on TikTok or whatever it is, and brands make an urgent pivot because they think they need to be there, but they haven't actually thought of the impact that it would have on their brand. And woke seems to be one of the biggest ones that is in that space, or rainbows. These are the two themes that I see quite a lot, that brands don't think the impact it may or may not have and just do a momentary jump or toe in and then jump out again.
Yep, yep. It is very true. And but probably, I'm guilty of doing it too, to be honest with you. I think we all fall in certain we get wrapped up in the moment. I like to call it, fail forward. But ultimately, that consistency and thinking about the long term, is this really true
Mm.
to your brand? And I guess that goes back to what I was saying before. You can stay away from fads by really understanding, is this who the brand is? And
Mm-hmm.
being authentic to who you are and who you want to be, versus just hopping on the next thing that's bringing you a whole bunch of followers, and increased engagement for a short period of time.
And that short term could actually confuse your general base as well.
Exactly.
You've got this small cohort that you've now secured, but they don't actually fit into any of your normal segments. So how will that impact your brand, the marketing efforts you do, your product, your service? So there needs to be more thinking through about, yes, it's great that we might be able to go there, but should we be going there?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been one of our challenges, as regulations change and there's certain words that we can no longer use. There's been quite a bit of pivoting that has to take place in a regulated industry, which again makes us need to be quite agile and bring this talent in house. So that's something else that I've really learned in my time, is having key people within your team in house allows you to be agile and pivot and be
Mm.
considered, um, and make sure that everything that you're putting out is not reinvented. You never want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, but that the foundations are still there and you're just learning how to say it in a different way. So that's one thing that I've noticed over the last few months that, we're probably guilty of as a brand ourselves, is, you know, the working through what we can and cannot say, and still staying true to what our patients need to know about us so that we can help with their outcomes.
Exactly. And I think this is probably a good time for you to maybe provide some advice that you'd give to emerging brands looking to achieve those long-term successes. You've learned a lot along the way here. What other tips or tricks or advice would you give? Particularly, hindsight's a beautiful thing, but what could you
Mhm.
share?
Get the foundations right.
Mhm.
I think that's such an important thing. And when I say get the foundations right, is understand your purpose, live your purpose, make sure that everyone within your organization understands what it is and is true to that. Understand your customer. It's, again, you don't own your brand. Your customer owns your brand. So what they think of the brand is ultimately what your brand means. And so you need to understand, what is the problem that you can solve for your customers. It's not just about, a sales dollar. It's not just about revenue. It's, what is the difference that you can make? Why do they need you? And so I think that fundamentally is at the core of understanding, you know, the purpose of your
Mm.
brand. What is your purpose? And then, as I mentioned earlier, the understanding the customer, building out those segmentations. How can you have those personalized conversations in today's day and age? The traditional form of mass media and, big TV ads, there's still a place for them, but more one-on-one personalized conversations has become more important than ever. So again, that customer segmentation and persona work is so critical, especially in digital experiences where you can have those conversations. Um, and yeah, just building out your brand platform and architecture. So consistency, make sure you have those brand guidelines and they're implemented across all your channels. There's a reason they exist. So make sure that your owned channels and your paid channels and your earned channels are all saying the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
And it's that's always a fun one, especially when you have multiple teams working on it. So it's that consistency and that collaboration, I think, is so important. So getting all of those fundamentals right,
Mm.
and then looking at scaling is really key. Otherwise, it's not that you can't do it. It'll just take longer, and there'll be more friction points. And as you mentioned before, you might you'll cause some of the confusion if you're chopping and changing who you are or what you want to stand for, or following
Mm,
the next shiny thing over there. You, customers won't recognize who you are.
exactly. I would love to know, out of all the brands you've worked on, which one was the most fun and why? Like what brand campaign did you work on that you just look back and go, oh, that was awesome.
Oh, that's a really hard question because there's so many.
You can pick a couple.
Uh, yeah, there's a few. You know, surprisingly Walmart. And I know that, it's probably not the first thing that comes to mind when people hear that, but I was involved in the Walmart Live Better campaign, which was all about going and interviewing Walmart employees whose lives had changed thanks to the company. And I always thought Walmart was kind of the devil. It was just like you hear a lot of bad stuff come out.
Yep.
And so I was a bit hesitant to work on that brand at first, but it was one of the most heartfelt, nurturing
Mm,
experiences of my 20-year career, where I met some incredible people whose lives were fundamentally changed
mm,
by the organization or someone within the organization. So, we got to travel around really small little towns in America that, most people hadn't heard of, and just meet, it was a very humbling experience, to be honest with you. So that was, I think, a very heartfelt time. Then the most fun, honestly, any of the animal campaigns. I'm a big animal lover at
yep.
heart, and so working with various animal welfare projects or ASPCA's, just
Yep.
most challenging, items to shoot are kids and animals. And so I'd be crawling on all fours, barking at a dog, trying to get a reaction from the dog to bark back.
I love
So
it.
yeah. And look, that was definitely the most fun time. I mean, I used to have a thing where I would try to get an animal into every campaign that I did. So whether it was a chicken, or at one point I brought in a llama, I brought in a goat,
Nice.
dogs and cats. And so that was my little Easter egg. It was almost the calling card of Zoe's worked on this brand. Um,
Have you
so
brought
and
in
then and
any
then
now?
I not for this brand, no, but I've amassed my own little zoo. So I live in the Noosa hinterland, and I have my own goats and sheep and
Yeah.
furry friends. So I'm getting my furry fix that way. But then also most recently at Rebel, working with the Matildas as part of the
Mm.
Women's World Cup, and interviewing Mary Fowler. That was another, very humbling experience. I believe when I interviewed her, she was, just, I don't even know if she did 20 yet. She was so young and so wise in what she was saying. So I think that's it. The people you meet, the talent that you get to work with, the ambassadors, the influencers. Um, it's yeah. I mean, there's no other industry I'd rather be in.
Mm.
So it's more than one, but I mean, I could go on honestly for days.
And I do have two final questions I always ask. You've kind of touched on it a bit, but what excites you most about brand?
Uh, what So brand is, again, the foundations of telling a story. I mean, we all have a brand. We all have our own personal brand. Companies have a brand, products have a brand. And so it's your story. That's ultimately what a brand is, right? And it's what people take away and hear your story to be. And so at the heart of it, it goes back to me being a storyteller. Um, I I always found it fascinating to tell a story in 30 seconds. And again, this goes back to traditional advertising, but I was 12 years old watching TV to watch the commercials, not to watch the actual shows, because I thought it was so um, clever of certain brands that could tell such a concise, funny, humorous, emotional,
Mm.
fill in the blank here story in just 30 seconds. But then also ultimately my dad is a pop artist. He's a well-known British pop artist. And so he took brands, and this probably influenced why I love this field so much. But he was surrounded by the likes of Andy Warhol and David Hockney. And so he would take, Campbell's soup cans and, famous car brands and use those in his paintings. So that I'm sure left a mark on why it's become such a passion of mine.
It's definitely that bringing in the art influence creativity into it and making something that resonates with people. So it can be very exciting to be able to do that and see the fruits of the labor where people are wanting to be attached to that brand too. So I can understand why you love it so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
My final question I ask everybody, and I do pre warn everyone. So, what brand, any brand in the world, best represents you and why?
Oh, I saw this question. I was like, this is a very tricky one. Um, so I do have two, and they're very different. So the first one is, you're probably going to chuckle, but is Barbie. And it's not just because I'm blonde, but it's I have a young daughter. I was a young girl a long time ago, and I too had Barbies, and she loves Barbies. But as a brand, they have evolved with the times, and pivoted when they needed to pivot as,
Mm.
cultural trends evolved, and women and how people perceived women evolved. And so I'm just really fond of how that brand is still relevant today, and almost even more so today, given the whole, Barbie craziness that happened a couple years ago when the movie came out.
Exactly.
Um, and it's just they do it so well. The storytelling,
Mm.
the omni-channel approach across everything that they touch, the educational aspects of it, the yeah, the empowerment. So like I'm one of those moms that still really enjoys watching my daughter play with Barbie, and I allow her to watch the shows because it's teaching her about kindness. It's teaching her that she
Mm.
can do whatever she wants, whether it's an astronaut or a teacher or a gymnast. It doesn't
Yep.
matter as long as she's happy. So that's one brand. And then the other complete polar opposite is Yeti. So
Yep. Yep.
I'm a bit of a Tom girl, hence the whole mini farm. But again, Yeti started from as a premium cooler company, and has just transformed into this really premium outdoor lifestyle brand. I own way too many Yetis that I like care to admit. My husband absolutely hates me for it. He's like, "Why do you need 5 Yeti coffee cups?" But they're so good, and the way that they've built that brand is, the market positioning, the strong brand identity, and then quality and innovation. Right? They keep
Mm.
innovating.
Yep.
Um, and bringing in technology, and then also staying down to earth. But they're like, yes, you're going to have to spend an arm and a leg, but we're worth it. And they have such a large following, and built such a community around them as a brand. So yeah, I mean, those are probably the two that are best reflect who I am. It's the stilettos, and then the mucking the stalls.
I love it because they're also both storytelling brands.
They are. Yes.
So it fits perfectly in with what you've shared with us today.
That's very on brand.
Thank you so much for sharing so much. I'm just going to do a quick recap of what I've learnt today for everyone. So just bear with me for a minute, Zoe. I'll be back in just a second. So today we talked all about brands, and brand is a story. So you've got to make sure that you know what your narrative is, depending on what the industry and brand is that you're trying to create, because you want to make sure it makes a difference and is different to everyone else in the market. You need to really know who and what you're wanting to stand for, what that narrative is. And how do you go about that? Is you make sure you build the foundations. So when we're talking about foundations here, it's about the purpose. We need to live it as well. So whatever the purpose is, you need to be able to live it and breathe it within the company. And that's what the brand will resonate. It should also come back to being understood by your customer and stand for your customers as well. So it's imperative also as part of the process to know who your customer segment is. That's kind of important if you've got a brand out there. And you can do that through customer segmentations, personas. Research is a great place to start. If then you can identify gaps. If you've got data, that's even better because that's rich. maybe even doing some customer value propositions so that you know the company's got alignment with the brand and the purpose for your customers. You can also go down the lines of how you can measure brand. So, measuring brand, you've got either your short term or your long term results, but ultimately, you want to make sure that the brand's got longevity. And that's what we've been talking about today, that storytelling. So, how you can help to measure this along the way is a brand health checker where you look at the awareness, consideration, the intent to purchase, all of those magical pieces. Then you can add in if there's some measuring that you can do on brand equity itself. And you add in different things like traffic, perception, there's a whole pile of other pieces that you add in there. And another tool that you can use to help understand how your brand is perceived out in the market is utilizing social listening tools. There's many different platforms out there. We talked about Reddit today, but I myself have used in Australia. There's another forum that's done by consumers, which is OzBargain and Whirlpool. They're always great places to go to hear what consumers are thinking about your products and services over time, because they're not necessarily always going to tell you. And this will help you understand if they're perceiving what your brand is and what it stands for, and if you've got any issues or concerns that you need to start addressing or potential new ideas. It's all about making sure that when you're creating this brand that there is consistency, because hopefully you're going to expand and grow and get bigger and bigger with scaling. So you need to be able to help everyone within the organization understand what the brand is, its purpose. And you can use things like a brand platform and the architecture to assist with this. So they're things like, simple as it sounds, a brand style guide, because then everyone knows the colors, the fonts, the tones, the catchphrases, the size ratios, all of those pieces will help for consistency. So no matter what format you're being seen in, there's that consistent look and feel so consumers feel safe and trusted working with your brand. The brand itself should be true to your core, and that element should never change. Other things will change over time. Like today, we talked about the brand stays the same, but the actual technology that helps support the product or service changes. But because the brand has that trust and it's trying to help the consumer and also remove any of the frictions, therefore it's going to be a better experience. So the brand still has that consistency of still delivering, but delivering in a different way. So again, trust and authenticity and the transparency that comes along. But if you're owning a brand, it's always important to be agile. Understand what your consumers are wanting and doing and saying about your brand. And sometimes over time, you may need to evolve your brand a little bit. So evolution can be something very small. We've seen things like Nike over the years has changed slightly its tick. Coca-Cola and Pepsi have constantly kept their colors the same, but they've changed them in different nuances to be more modern. But again, the core of the brand has stayed the same. They're things to consider if you're further along the path, but just make sure that you're true to your brand story and that you're always telling that story in a way that is authentic and true, and that everyone in your business lives and breathes it, no matter if they're a contractor or not. Anything you'd like to add to that, Zoe?
I think you summed it up perfectly, Susan.
Wonderful. Thank you again so much for your time. I've really appreciated it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was lovely.
Everyone, don't forget to link with Zoe on LinkedIn. I'll have her details in the show notes so everyone can keep in touch and see the amazing work that you do. And everyone else, also, don't forget to add more to marketing to your playlist so you don't miss out on future fabulous guests. More to marketing.